Sí? Ara, perfecte. Molt bona tarda a tothom. Avui tornem a fer la sessió com havíem fet ja altres vegades i avui és dels dies que és una sessió que intenta tenir un àmbit d'expansió més gran, d'àmbit europeu, i per tant la sessió serà fonamentalment en anglès. Thank you very much for being here. We knew that today was not going to be one of the crowded days because the theme we are going to tackle is not really academic, neither is yet in the newspapers. It will be very soon in the newspapers, so that's the reason why we decided to do it now. And the idea is to have the vision of the people that have been working with this. This is you can find that in the internet, changing wildfires, policy options for a fire-literate and fire-adapted Europe. And this is an issue of very high social interest that attracts some academics, that attracts the people that are working in the field with fires, and that is of huge social impact. Nonetheless, these are the typical themes that are being tackled after something has happened. So that's the reason we try to do it now in June, because that's really before what is going to happen. We were talking a moment ago saying that now that we are getting ready for the vacations, people that are in the field are getting ready for the hard work. So this is something, as you know, organized by the Academia Europea, and we are really very, very grateful to the Royal Academy of Science and Arts of Barcelona, the RACAP, where you have this magnificent setting for having the talk. These talks are being recorded, are being streamed right now, and in a few days it will be also accessible through internet. And today, for this presentation, we have first Professor Urbano Fra Paleo. He is the person that made us aware of this report, and he is the person that coming from the University of Extremadura that has been working on this report. We have, as the other invited speaker, Marc Castegnou, that is a person that is really, that knows in first person the big problem of the fires in general, so the fires in forests. And we have as moderator Ariadna Goenaga, that she is in the Pau Costa Foundation, that is a foundation that is devoted to the problems derived on fires, and she's going to give us the general introduction. Thank you very much to all of you guys for accepting to be here for this talk.
Okay, thank you, Jaume, and thank you to the Academia Europea for making room to the wildfires topic in its scientific dialogues program. Thank you also to the speakers, Marc Castegnou and Urbano Fra, for accepting to participate. And of course, thank you to the audience here in this magnificent room and there on the virtual space. And I hope that we are going to have a enriching session. And before advancing to the first talk, I have prepared a very, very short text to provide context to the matter that we're talking about here. Okay, wildfires have become an increasingly severe global issue. I believe everyone in the room and online has in recent years seen in the media the devastating fires in Los Angeles, Canada, Chile, or in many Mediterranean countries. Wildfires, exacerbated by climate change, land use practices, and urban expansion into fire-prone areas, have changed the behavior pattern. The fire community alerts that the frequency, intensity, and concurrence of wildfires have surged across multiple continents, even across regions that were once with low risk of wildfire are now increasingly vulnerable. The session taking place today will provide the grounds to understand and address this new scenario of wildfire expansion and the increasing probability of extreme fires. Changing wildfires, policy options for a fire-literate and fire-adapted Europe. This is the title of the report that will serve as a basis for today's session. It carries the message that we are facing, as I said, a new wildfire scenario, and that, from this point forward, needs an approach based on scientific knowledge to implement measures and to raise the social awareness for a better adapted society to wildfires. The challenge is significant. For years, the wildfire community has been trying at all levels to stress that policies should focus more on prevention rather than fire suppression, that we needed landscapes and societies prepared for fires, and that this would involve a different socioeconomic structure. Now, this still stands, but it needs to be addressed urgently and globally. What is clear is that wildfires are more than just a striking event. How we decide to address them will say a lot about our priorities as a society. So I'm sure that the following talks will shed light on all of this. Well, let's get started. And the first talk is by Professor Urbano Fra. He's a retired professor of human geography at the University of Extremadura in Spain and member of the European Science and Technology Advisory Group of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. He's also a member of the Academia Europea. His research interests lie in the study of disaster risk governance, with particular emphasis on governance, patterns, and processes, including the assessment of institutional frameworks. I forgot to say that there will be time for questions, and that will be after both presentations. So we'll be taking your questions here in the room and online. So thank you, Professor Fra, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Thank you, Ariadna, for your presentation, or your introduction. And also, I'd like to extend my thanks to Professor Bertrand Petit, and also to the Academia of Sciences and Letters of Barcelona for hosting this event, and also to the Foundation Pau Costa for having accepted to participate in the event and also have a more diverse points of view about this challenging issue of wildfires. I'd like to start by touching upon some brief notes about ESAC, because ESAC is not so well known. So I'd like to say that ESAC, which means the European Academy of Science Advisory Council, and the 25 national science academies of the European Union, plus academies from Switzerland, Norway, and the UK, together with Academia Europea, belong to this council, and has the mission of identifying those topics that are challenging both for society and also for science, and give advice on this in order to enhance policymaking and policy development. So somehow it translates scientific knowledge into language that can be understood by policymakers, and it is a bridge also that helps to bridge the gap between policymaking and science. So the first question I'd like to raise is, what are the values of this report? The values that can be highlighted are that this report informs on the current state of the knowledge and also the latest scientific findings in this field, and also it examines the drivers which are behind the changes in wildfires, and also explores the consequences of these, of the impact of wildfires. It also reviews current wildfire policies, strategies, and management actions, and also identifies possible pathways for wildfire risk reduction and prepare for future challenges, taking into account the changing nature of wildfires. It also advocates for an integrated EU framework for fire adaptation through 8 policy options. And finally, it provides examples for these policy options by identifying proactive measures and also examples of these measures to illustrate how they can operate in the field. And in the end, the mission or the goal of this report is to support policy action, both at the national and also European levels. Now, a second question is why this report? There are 3 main reasons. The first is that wildfires have changed their nature in the last decades. And also, there is evidence that the predominant suppression strategy unconsciously has led to an increase in fuel loads, and ultimately it resulted in fewer but far more intense and destructive fires. And the third reason for this report is because policy action still replicates models of the past in a different context that has changed, as I said before, in the last decades. There is an apparently good news in identifying that the number of fires and the total area that has been burned in the last decades has decreased in Europe. And we can see in this figure how it has diminished this area burned in different countries, and also including Mediterranean countries in particular. However, what we also can see is that wildfires are becoming more extreme. They have changed in intensity, so now burnt areas are now concentrated in fewer but larger fires, and it has changed in frequency and timing, so now we have a longer fire season. The fire weather conditions have also changed, so we have more intense and extended droughts and heat waves, and there is a shift in the fire regimes from being fuel limited to being weather driven. So now the behavior of these fires is less predictable because their nature has changed, but also it is affecting, as we will see later, different areas than in the past. The models predict also that 1/5 of Southern Europe may experience severe wildfires as often as every 2 years. Also, the nature of wildfires has changed in terms of area. So we have more diverse wildfires. We usually think that fires just affect woodlands. However, wildfires affect many different landscapes, including forests, as I said, but also shrublands, grasslands, peatlands, and urban areas, or at least suburban areas. We also have to note that grassland fires are the most common fire in Europe, not in terms of extension, but also because of the use of fire for managing farming, particularly in Eastern Europe. So fires are also impacting regions that historically have been less affected and now are confronting a new hazard and new challenges in how to deal with this, with wildfires. The process has been also affected by land use changes, by climate change and social and economic dynamics. So managing wildfires and governing wildfire risk is increasingly complex, and we also have to take into consideration that it is a multi-hazard event. It's not just wildfire as a hazard involved, but we have many other hazards, including air pollution in particular, but many others like threatening industrial facilities, infrastructures, as we have seen with railroad communication, or also solar farms in some areas located in the rural landscape. So we have to think as wildfire not just as a single hazard, but many other hazards related and interacting to each other. This new the regional change of wildfires can be synthesized with this report published by the Arctic Council Secretariat, which is titled "The Arctic is on Fire." So the Arctic, and Europe has boreal region, is also an area that we have to think of in terms of how to deal with this new challenge. The new challenge is also in common or along with the thawing of permafrost. So these two hazards are for these areas the most critical hazards and challenges they are experiencing in this region. This is an example of the boreal forests that are being threatened, including, as we can see, in Europe. And we also see in this graph that the area that is losing a higher area or extension of forest is being the boreal region as compared to temperate, subtropical, or even tropical regions. So this is how it is a very urgent issue for this region in the world, including Northern Europe. But also there have been changes in the vulnerability of fires. Because there have been land use changes and socioeconomic changes in both directions. So we can see how farmland has been abandoned, particularly in marginal areas, and this was followed by an expansion of shrubland and woodland, and in particular in mountain areas. In the other direction, urban growth and urban sprawl, particularly suburbanization or counter-urbanization and the development of infrastructure, is increasing the encroaching in one area into the other and creating new spaces for wildfire. So we have what is called an increase in the area of wildlife-urban interface, or simplified with the acronym of WUI. So we have the populations that in the past were vulnerable already and marginalized, which often bear a disproportionate rate or share of the negative impacts of wildfires, but we have also now other societal groups in the suburban areas that are being exposed to this hazard. So the report identifies different regions, in particularly differentiates between three main regions: the Mediterranean Europe, the continental and alpine Europe, and Northern Europe. And the different attributes of these three regions in terms of fire size, fire season, of prevailing vegetation types, and also the societal processes that are taking place. So the policy options that we will see later on are thought in terms of regional differences as well, because we cannot propose a single solution for the whole continent of Europe. We have to think in terms of adaptation to the different regional contexts. On the other hand, the suppression-focused strategy assumes that wildfires can be stopped. However, we have seen in the last years how some high-intensity wildfires go out of control and may turn into an unmanageable problem. So we see here two examples, one in Canada, where in 2023, they had in the Northwestern Territories, and particularly in an area called Yellowknife, a wildfire that forced the evacuation of thousands of people, that has overwhelmed the capacity of the province to manage this wildfire, and also the capacity of the whole country. And we are much more familiar to other events like in 2016 or 2017 in Portugal, that has driven changes also in their policy making, as we will see later on. But we could also see this in other countries, like, for example, in Greece in 2007, and other like Spain, with some familiar fires, like in Zamora or in Malaga, that also overwhelmed the capacity of the suppression system to control these fires. This strategy also, despite the wildfire risk is increasing or changing in its dimensions, the response is being the same, just focusing on the flames, by which fire is bad and needs to be stopped. And following this principle, wildfires are managed as emergencies with short-term suppression and save and rescue. And also, policies are accommodated to this principle by disproportionately allocating resources mostly to fire suppression rather than to prevention. And just a fraction of these resources are dedicated to planning and to prevention. So the report supports or identifies 4 pathways for policymaking. It identifies different modes of policymaking from the past, and also promotes new modes of policymaking by shifting from high impact to low impact wildfires, from resisting fire to accepting fire and control its impacts, from reactive to combine reactive and proactive, and from just strengthening to integrating policies. So societies and decision makers need to understand the complexity of wildfires that goes beyond suppression. And so societies need to understand that many ecosystems are adapted to fire, and that there has been a cultural use of fire throughout Europe, that it has a long history that has decreased in the last decades. So wildfire shouldn't be seen not just a problem, but also part of the solution. And following this, societies must reach a consensus upon what's the acceptable risk for each society, locally and regionally, responding to the question of how do you want your fire? The report also elaborates 8 policy options. These options can be grouped into those options that have a systemic basis, or those that have a spatial approach. They include, in these options, some that support, in particularly, a governance of wildfires based on the management of landscape, and also on integrating different policies in order to reduce the risk of wildfire by adopting nature-based solutions to manage wildfires, by embracing the ecological and cultural role of fire, by investing in education and communication for wildfire awareness, reaching what the report calls fire literacy, by investing in landscape management to reduce vulnerability, by harmonizing multiple sectoral policies with impacts in wildfires, as we will illustrate with an example of a European policy, by promoting compact urban development. It's not just an issue of rural areas, but also of urban areas, and by encouraging sustainable private land management. These 8 policies are supported by examples for all of them, including the Ramats de Foc, which is an example by the Pau Costa Foundation. Also, another example in Spain is the Mosaico initiative in Extremadura, in Western Spain. And an example of a change in policy making, as I mentioned before, is also the initiative of implementing an agency for the integrated management of fires in Portugal, called AGIF. Why do we need an integrated wildfire risk reduction? Well, we need this because by implementing a solution, we have to consider all the associated benefits and costs. And the 8 policy options that are in the report evaluate this, evaluate both benefits and reports and costs. So we have synergies in these measures that can be adopted, but also we have trade-offs and possible conflicts as well. We have to consider all of them in order to change our policy regarding wildfires. The European Union has adopted the EU biodiversity strategy and the forestry strategy with a vision for 2030. This vision entails the planting of 3 billion trees and the conversion of 2 million hectares of treeless areas into woodlands. But what has not been sufficiently considered is that we need to identify the most suitable sites for planting, that management of the stands and different measures should be adopted in order to properly manage these planted areas, that there should be a selection of species, and that synergies with other policies have to be identified, and also modes of governance have to be adopted in order to better manage the plantation and also wildfire risk. So Europe must learn to coexist with fire and adapt to this evolving landscape. All EU policy areas have an impact on wildfires, even environmental policies, as we have seen before. So we have the Common Agricultural Policy, Climate Adaptation Strategy, and so on, many examples of different policies that have an impact on wildfire risk. So mitigating climate change is not just about planting trees, but also requires design principles like we've seen before. So in this evolution of coexistence with fire, fire should be understood as a component of the landscape and part of the solution and not just a problem. So we need to increase the awareness of population and decision makers through education for all ages and a fire-literate society in order to adapt and live with fire. Policies must shift from predominantly suppression to a policy adopting integrated and adaptive strategies to manage fire as a natural element, recognizing its role in specific ecosystems, prioritizing risk reduction, and not managing wildfires just as emergencies, but also part of a sustainable, proactive environmental strategy by combining proactive and reactive measures. This requires strengthening the institutional capabilities with vertical and horizontal policy harmonization. We need to engage all levels of government, from European to local. We need to engage all horizontal policies, not just those relating to forest or to civil protection, but all sectors in government. We need enhanced cooperation with all stakeholders. It's not just an issue of decision makers and governments. It is a societal issue. We need to improve funding for prevention, post-fire restoration, and land use planning, and not just funds dedicated to suppression. And we need to adopt a multi-hazard and multi-risk approach by understanding that wildfires does not occur in isolation, that there are hazard interactions, and that other hazards are triggered by wildfires, including, as we mentioned, health risks. But also, I'd like to add something which is not in the report, but I think is worth mentioning. We need to be mindful of the paradox of prevention. Mandates are short-term, I mean political mandates. However, risk reduction requires long-term vision and continued action. And wildfire policy changes require political will and leadership. So the impact of preventative actions are not visible in the short term. And despite they have social, economic, and environmental returns in the midterm, they have uncertain returns in terms of public acceptation. So we may find rejection to invest and to put money of the citizens into proactive measures. And we have to be aware that while reactive measures or suppression is also followed by honors and medals, the adoption of proactive measures will not be followed by honors and medals. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Frank. Now it's your turn, Mark Castelnau. While you're preparing for the talk, I'm going to read. It's here. No, it's not here. Maybe it's in that computer.
No.
Okay. Let's see. While we're preparing for the talk, Mark is graduated in forestry engineering by the University of Lleida, and he's currently the chief of the GRAF, Group of Support for Forest Actions of Bombers de la Generalitat de Catalunya. He stands out for his contributions to the interpretation of the relationship between landscape and fire based on the concept of fire generations, and for his work in the interpretation of pyrocumulonimbus in the development of extreme fire events.
Okay. I think now we have it ready. Well, yeah. Okay. As operational, as a firefighter, my expertise is more in interpretation of the fire behavior and predicting fire behavior and doing analysis and understanding how ecosystems, vegetation, society, and fire behavior interact and produce wildfire. The issue and what we've been listening is that fires are changing, things are going worse, climate change has a lot to do, but social change has a lot to do as well. So we understand that it's a social change that started the problem, but now it's a climate change that it's that it's burning extremely on top of those landscapes that are continuous because politically we haven't made the best decisions. So at the end of the day, it comes out that we forgot to live with fire, and after 3 centuries of farming everything, Europe has come back to have more than 50% forests, and those forests burn, and they burn naturally. They burn naturally by lightning, but they also burn by human cause. But that's creating fire spread, and we don't understand that fire spread. Now we are trying to bring back mosaic and a more rural economy, but that's not the society we have. And we have a problem, and then we send firefighters to fight those fire and try to stop that fire to protect biodiversity, but to protect society. And that will provide this point of view, the point of view of the ones that are dealing with the fires, but we don't have the knowledge because academy doesn't have the knowledge. There is no model to predict that fire. The models we have are not working in the fires we are fighting. So as operationals, we are years in front of what science is explaining to us. And that's a big gap. That's called the research gap on wildfire. And I think that's an important issue. So we've been talking about Pedro Grande fire. This is Pedro Grande fire. That's a video that the footage was taken from the roof of the fire service station. So you can see the plume of the fire coming down to Pedro Grande. And we knew that that day a frontal passage will make that fire shift to the west. And now you will see that shifting to the west. But it's happening at the end of the day, into the night, and going down the slope. So we're expecting something slower. But look at that plume. Look at that level of smoke. It's going down, down, down until it falls down to the ground and lights everything. That's 18,000 hectares in less than half an hour. That's 64 civilian lives gone in less than 21 minutes. That was Pedro Grande fire. Who could predict that? Nobody. There was any model available to understand that? No. What did the science tell us? Hey guys, what you're explaining is not possible because we cannot predict it. So we had to remind academy that the scientific method is about the reality tells which hypothesis is right or not. Your hypothesis should be sustained by reality. Reality didn't sustain models, and that was a blow. And that blow was 2017, the same year after that we burned in Chile, Las Máquinas, also burning 8,000 hectares per hour. And the year after in Canada, we burned the big fire up there. So between 2017 and 2021 in Europe, and all around the world, we've gone through a wave of change. The fires are not anymore the ones they used to be, and we still don't understand it. We still are modeling that. And of course, we need policies, but above all, what we need is science. We need proper science to deal properly with the problem we still don't understand. That's what I'm going to talk about it. So that's data from Catalonia 2021. It was the year where the Mediterranean burned all over. And here you have the distribution in terms of fire line intensity, which is the energy released by the fire front per meter. So every meter of the fire front was releasing an amount of energy. So 10,000 kilowatts per meter, which is a lot of energy, is the maximum we can handle. More than that means that we as the firefighters will get burned in our skins, we will die. If we are exposed to more than 1 minute to 10,000 kilowatts per meter, we're gone as a firefighter. So that's the human limit. Either we fight with drones or cyborgs. We cannot fight fires that go over that threshold. So the average model fire behavior in Catalonia that year was around 4,200 kilowatts per meter. So it means less than average. Pretty good. We can do it. Let's do it. Things are going well. But the reality, the measure one, when we take the measures by satellite, by sensors in our fire, it means that in reality, we were burning at 8,400 kilowatts per meter. So modeling tells us one thing. Reality tells us that we are really close to the limit. And that's what's happening. 2017 was a clear example of a change in fire behavior all around the world. And that translated to a ROS bias, a rate of spread bias. Our fires burn faster. And burning fast, they burn more fuel per second. And burning that, they release a lot more energy. And that is what's making our fires impossible to fight. We are going close to the limit. And that's what's going on around the world. And it is an example in Catalonia. And why that's happening? That's happening because we are getting what it's called pyroconvection. It means the energy released by the fires in the atmosphere, it's injected in the free troposphere, and on there, it modifies by entrainment the atmospheric boundary layer. And modifying the atmospheric boundary layer creates weather conditions that are more extreme than the ones they have, so they can somehow create their own weather. That's fire atmosphere coupling, and that fire atmosphere coupling is a process that is known and has been on research. But the models that we are using to predict that, they work at 200, 300 meter resolutions. But the processes in the atmosphere and entrainment that produce that coupling, they work at centimeters of resolution. So we are still far away in computational ways to produce that. And that's a gap. We need more science. We need the academy to speed up, because we cannot hold on reality without the proper knowledge. The other thing that we've listened before is that the fires usually are limited by the fuel that it burns. More fuel, because more droughts or more rural land abandonment means bigger fire. And that's what for example, we saw when we went to Bolivia to help them to fight the biggest fire in their history. It was a Robre fire, 1.5 million hectares. It was one of the fastest fires on Earth till the moment, with more than 160 kilometers run by the fire in 4 hours. That was an amazing fire. That is incredible. But we explained that because climate change, because the drought, and because a lot more instability in the atmosphere. So more coupling happening there. But in 2021, in the same place, exactly in the same place, we had a fire that burned even faster. And one must say, well, then your hypothesis fails. I mean, there is no fuel there. It burned already 2 years ago. So of course there is fuel, but there is not enough fuel in 2 years to burn that. How on earth a fire can produce even faster runs if there is no energy to do that? So the only place a fire can get the energy from, if it's not from the fuel, it's from the atmosphere. And it's not from the weather and the surface weather. It's from the energy in the free troposphere. And that's when the atmosphere hypothesis took the lead in front of the fuel hypothesis. So our fire used the energy from the fuel to modify the atmosphere. When one then modify the atmosphere, especially the boundary layer, they can get into the free troposphere. And in the free troposphere, they can couple and they can travel faster. And that's what we saw in Maui. A fire hitting the city and burning faster in the city than outside the city, when in the city was no fuel for that. Of course, there were houses burning, but there was not enough capacity to produce an energy flux, a mass flux from the house burning. So the fire burned through the city to the sea, using energy from the atmosphere and from the water vapor from the sea. The fire was evaporating, like in Quineta fire in 2018, that killed a lot of people as well. So we need to change the physics of fire coupling if we really want to confront those fires and do a proper fire management. Without knowledge, there would not be focus management to do. The other thing that we are starting to see is that this modification of the fire is explaining, of the atmosphere, explaining the long-lasting fire. I mean, this is an example of the height of the boundary layer in using more than 1,000 fires around the world. And so you see the blue and the green lines as the predicted by the atmospheric models, the ECM European models, the height of the boundary layer and the modeled boundary layer. And more or less they go the same way. But when you look at the red dots, those red dots are the observed boundary layer, the real one measured on the fire. So really the fire are modifying the boundary layer and allowing the boundary layer to be modified through the night. And at the bottom, in the box plots, you see the Ross bias. It means how many times the speed of the fire is higher than the expected speed of the fire. I mean the modeled one, using the physical models we know about a spread fire. And as you see, Once the atmosphere is high enough, the fire gets the highest as expected rate of spread. But then at the night, when you start to see the modification, is when you start to see the highest speed. So that modification is directly related to the accelerating fire. So either we understand how fires modify the atmosphere, or we cannot model properly our fire. And that's a big issue right now. And we've been taking measures of those plumes, and we are launching zones inside the plumes as a firefighter, and taking quite a risk on doing that. You see here an example of, that's Juliana, that's June 2022, launching the sensors into the plumes to measure temperature and humidity. And here you have the profiles of speed of the plume, rising speed, and as you can see, the highest the plume, the fastest the plume go, and the highest the plume, the more moist it goes. So the real engine of those plumes is not the engine of the energy from the fire. Once the plume can send the water vapor of the vegetation burning into the condensation level in the free troposphere, it can condensate, creating a cloud, a storm cloud, and so that releases latent heat, and that latent heat warms the air around and helps the plume to keep rising. So this is the condensation portion of the atmosphere. It's the engine that fuels our fire. And with hotter climates, our atmosphere holds more water, facilitates this process, and creates those extreme fire. So things are going differently than we expected. And that's an example of what it means for a fire to create a storm cloud. It means what we call a pyrocumulus. That's an example of the lake fire creating that. That's a storm cloud. And that creates a thing going up and a thing going down. But that's what it means for the firefighters. That's the urban interface, the houses below that cloud. That's the moment the cloud is going up, and now you will see the moment the cloud is going down. It falls on your head. The fire rains on your head. How on earth you want to fight fire there? That's what you saw in Portugal, Pedra Grande, in Moving, but the same process. So you rise the cloud, clouds pull down, expand the fire crazy. If you think your mental set is the mental set of full brakes, that's going to fail. It's a process of energy. Energy is stored in the landscape. Energy is stored in our atmosphere. Trigger points. When you had enough energy in the landscape to trigger the energy of the atmosphere, and how that will behave. That's a crazy thing. We are crossing a threshold, and the threshold is not anything we ever expected. And the new thing that's Texas fire, that's 2024. It's a fire of 1 million hectares. I still remember the fire. Our engines had to refuel twice before going from the back to the head of the fire. We couldn't go all the way of the fire without refueling. It is an immense fire. And that fire, we launched the zones inside there, and we discovered new things in there. And that's the profile of our sensor rising on the atmosphere, is the red line. But if I take out the energy from the atmosphere, my zone will have been traveling like this. And that's the temperature profile, and that's the rising speed profile. But if I turn that rising speed profile horizontally in time, like the temperature profile, it goes really fast in the rising moment, but then it starts to oscillate. And that oscillation, that's a gravity wave. The plume is hitting the stability of the fifth troposphere. If we can move it higher, then we can create condensation and we can create the cloud and release that energy. If not, then you come down and you start to create that process. And that is pushing the fire ahead. And that's the beating of the fire. So initially we had the fuel engine, then we had the condensation engine, and now we have the compression engine. This is 3 physical processes, and we are trying to solve a problem using only one of the 3 physical processes. There is a long way to go. 66% of the knowledge is still not in our modeling. We need to hurry up because those fires started to happen in 2017, and we're already in 2025. And now we produce the first report and explain to the policy maker. But that's That's almost a decade later. That's the gap between reality and knowledge. And that's where we are. And that means that during this time, our fires of this type has gone from 0.9% to 10%. So now they are significant. That doesn't mean that those processes are new. They are not new. We know fires from the 20s, 60s, and the 70s that did the same, but they were rare. Now they are starting to become common. And that's the tricky point here. That's what we need to handle. And that's an example of the energy modification. I put here the ABL height of the boundary layer, and at the bottom, the LCL height. So the condensation level. So if the condensation level and the boundary layer level are the same height, they should be around the dot line. And there are some fires historically that has been there, but the most important fire has been down there. But if you add the energy, then all of them converge to the line. And that's what's going on right now. And that's what's going on. But look at another thing. The blue, the violet, and the orange are the late in the day, mid of the night fire. The ones that should not be doing that, because we all know that the fires burn better at noon than at night. But the new fires are doing that better at night than at noon. And we didn't know why, but now we know why. We know why because the energy of the fire can rise the plume, but it's losing really fast the energy because it's mixing with the atmosphere. So if your atmosphere is not lower, you will never make it to the top and start to produce the new fire behavior. But at the night, the boundary layers are shallower. So the energy unit is less. But at night, your fuel is not available to make it. So traditionally, at night, the fires haven't done that process. But with climate change, temperature and humidity at night are low at the tropical night, we know. So they have the climate now, or the meteorology now at night, to do the process in the shallow atmosphere that they cannot do at noon because the atmosphere are really taller. And that's why our fires are shifting to the night. So things are getting complex. Things are getting tough. We know what we need to look. We need to invest in knowledge to make the models operational. There is a gap here, but if we want to accomplish the management, we need to have the science first over the table. Europe is well prepared to do that, but we need to invest in that before making promises that we will change anything. We cannot change anything if we don't know what to change. And the problem is that we are going to fight fires. I will be sending firefighters tomorrow to fight fires, and I cannot even know for sure if I can protect their life, not even protect the life of the civilians they are willing to protect. That's the problem, and that's the challenge. And that's why we are here in Academy of Science, to just raise the awareness for that. Thank you.
Well, it's 7 sharp, I think, so we have 30 minutes for questions. Is there any question in the room? Or?
Thank you very much to both of you. The points that Mark has raised are really shocking in the sense that so the amount of scientific knowledge that is still needed to try to move forward in your work, it's really huge. So the point. So to try to correct that, there is always, always we have one point, and it's that if you want to solve, doesn't matter what in society, you have a magic point called education. And in this sense, to which extent, where in education or where for example, do you think that we have enough people, be it in physics, be it in engineering, that are ready to handle these points? Are there research groups that are focusing on this kind of problems? So this is something that is really needed.
So that's the problem we have here. We don't understand. So we need to educate our society so they understand the problem. So they support investing in research and getting the knowledge before throwing everything and containing a fire. We already are saying we cannot contain. It's like during the COVID. Instead of investing in the vaccine, you invest in sheets and beds. At least people can die in peace, but we cannot save them. But we invested in really go fast to find a vaccine. So at the moment, we need the knowledge, the proper knowledge, well-framed, to make our society do the investment right. So the big problem right now is that we as a Forest Service are getting the data, high-quality data, measured data, to build the models and adjust the models. But there is not a single team ready to use that data. So we, Forest Service, has more knowledge than the academies in physics here at the University in Barcelona to run those models. And we're relying on models made in Melbourne, made in the Netherlands, which is the flat Rhine Delta, or made in San Jose in California. But the data is ours. No data about the coupling of the last coupling and using the aerosols in the plume and how that model is working. It's made using the Santa Coloma fire plume data. Santa Coloma Queral fire. NOAA is basing their decisions on that. So we have a lack of investment on knowledge, and we need that knowledge. If not, I cannot take the decisions. And if I cannot take a decision, the only plan I can provide is try to not to lose everybody. So, and anybody that has been working in a strategy know that a defensive plan is a plan to sustain the status quo. That any single change will mean total failure. So we are confronting a loss of biodiversity, a loss of living capacity in our country if we are not able to adapt our ecosystems to the new climate. And that means managing fire.
Thank you very much. And in the same way, I would like to make a question to Urbano, in the sense that one of the themes that are recurring is in a certain way, what is being done to prevent fires sometimes is taken as against people in the ecologists, in the sense that the whatever means to cut a given forest is intended as is interpreted as something negative to nature. In this sense, sometimes I've seen it is difficult to make people accept that to have more this idea of having the landscapes in which there are many different pieces, what you call the mosaic structure of a landscape. But even now, we are seeing that lots of NGOs related to ecologists are against it. So maybe we also need, in this case, an education in terms of trying to accept the modification, the human modification of landscapes and of forests to be adapted to the real use of land.
Yeah, certainly. We have to also take into account that most wildfires or large sections are being burnt in protected areas. And so how can we manage this conflict of protecting biodiversity in these protected areas and at the same time avoid the risk? So how can we adopt some of these measures that enter into conflict with protection, environmental protection? For example, can we use prescribed fires to control the amount of biomass in protected areas. It is always conflicting to adopt prescribed fires in any area, but even more in protected areas. So these are the issues that have to be resolved in terms of societal, as Mark has mentioned, societal agreement on what level of risk is acceptable for a society, and also what type of environmental protection do we want as a society, at the same time as reducing wildfire risk. So there is an Australian scientist called Ross Bradstock who launched the idea or the model of the 4 switches. We have 4 switches to control wildfires. The first switch is availability of biomass. As Mark has mentioned, biomass is the fuel, the first fuel that's where wildfires start. The second is the availability of moisture or flammability of this biomass or fuel. And the third are the triggers or the igniting process that triggers the fire. And the fourth switch is what Mark has been emphasizing all the time, which is weather. Of the 4 switches, we have only control of 1 of them. We cannot control 3. We just can control the amount of biomass. And so in your question is implicit that having a landscape that is structured as a mosaic is a way of controlling the amount of biomass and also propagation. So we have only that switch. So Mark has emphasized how science has to evolve in terms of modeling, because models of the past are not useful anymore. The models for propagation we had are not useful anymore. We need new models. But we also have to call for action in acting at the level of landscape, in having control of the amount of fuel or flammable fuel in the landscape. And that's to be done only at the scale of landscape, taking into account not just private landowners, but also governments who are the managers of protected areas. So here is needed this societal agreement on what type of landscape do we need in order to have more control of the expansion of this and the reduction of this risk.
All right. I have a question for both of you, I guess. I'm just wondering whether this idea that we should switch to, in a sense, living with fire, integrating it, rather than simply resisting it. I question how feasible this is in present conditions, and especially in highly densely populated areas. And Europe is very densely populated. And I was thinking about Australia that used to apply that kind of policy. The Australians would let enormous extensions of the outback and forests of eucalyptus just burn. In fact, the eucalyptus catch fire almost spontaneously. And in the 40s and 50s, the extensions of burned land were enormous, but they could control the fires. Whenever they came close to a highly populated area, they would just divert it. And a few years before the pandemic, things, and after long years of drought, things changed dramatically. And firefighters were telling people that they couldn't control them because they were too intense, they were going very fast, and they were arriving too quickly to highly populated areas. So I'm just questioning how much we can go back to this idea of living with the fire, letting the fire burn, and try to control it, et cetera, in a moment in which we have weather conditions and densely populated areas that make the policy perhaps dangerous. I don't know.
So some questions means eucalyptus doesn't burn faster than other species. They burn pretty well, that's for sure. But they also don't burn. So if you look at the fires in 2020 in Australia, or the fires in eucalyptus in Pedra Grande, the youth eucalyptus didn't burn. It was green, totally green. So we need to understand better our species and how they burn and how they don't burn. And the other thing is that the Australian Aboriginals burn a lot, and we know it because their academy has done the job. But go to La Vanguardia and look at 1924, 1889, 1864. Look for the fires in Catalonia. They were burning in June. They were still burning in September. Hundreds of thousands of hectares were burning. And that's the fire regime, natural fire regimes that we were doing. But our industrial revolution made that our landscape, instead of providing goods for the population, they started to provide the raw material for the industry. And then we said fire is bad because the way our population was managing fire since millennia has been using fire. Because the only way that a really small population can manage huge amount of landscape is through fire. And they need fire to do that and to maintain their goats and sheep. And we have that really embedded in our traditions. We're really close to San Juan. San Juan is when on the Pyrenees, they throw the fires down the slopes, burning the whole valleys to create the new grass to go up. And San Antonio in January is when we did that in the Iberian Peninsula. And between them, there is the transhumancia. And transhumancia, if you look at the word, is trans, between, humancia is humo, between smokes, between burning in January, burning in June. And that is transhumancia, that the Roman Empire tried to break down at the beginning of the Roman colonization of the Iberian Peninsula, because the only way to bring Celtics and Iberian down to the role of the empire is that not allowing them to thrive free with protein the whole landscape. So what the Aboriginals did in Australia is the same that the Europeans did it. The only thing is that we haven't put that in scientific paper. Said that means, can we allow fire to burn through our landscape? That's not the right question. The right question is, can we avoid that happening? And the answer is no. We have seen that in Greece, in Turkey, even the Australians have seen it. 27 million in only 1 year of hectares burned down to ash. Because they said, we can do that with prescribed fire. We can manage that, but the rate of burning was not even the one it should be naturally. If we go down to Catalonia, we should be burning almost 15,000 hectares per year. The irony is that in the 60s, when we said, well, we have to bring down the problem of fire, the average in Catalonia was 13,000. Now that we put millions on it, the average that we burn per year is around 1,000. So every year, we are coming short 14,000 hectares. And that's exactly what's building the problem. So we, coming out of, after 300 years of farming everything, lost the knowledge of our ancestors, burning our landscape. And we thought the fire was our enemy, because at the moment, the timber was the good. It was not the fire anymore producing grassland or flowers or flowers for honey. It was the fire burning the timber for the raw material from the industry. Then I had to stop it. And then we changed the whole landscape. And now we understand anything. But the problem is that the question is not if we can allow that to happen. The question is how we will make sure that happens. Another thing that we know is that that's not going to last. That's a wave of change. Our ecosystems are changing because they are adapting to the new climate. Every time we see a forest burn, the new forest that grows up grows adapted to the climate we have now. And the old forest that gone into ashes and we cry is the forest that was adapted to the climate. It was burned. So that process of adaptation is a wave of change. Once we've gone through all that, we will have a landscape a lot more resilient to fire. So those big fires will have gone. And that's, again, something we know from other previous periods of change. The only issue is that right now we have enough power as a society to try to hold on. So it's a problem of either we take the decisions to protect what we have now, or we shift it and we decide in a creative mode, understanding the consequences in the future of the decisions we are taking right now. And that's the only thing we have to do. But the way the Aboriginals burn is exactly the same way that my grandfather used to burn in the mountains in southern Tarragona. They went up, they had a big party celebration, they thanked God for everything, and they light fire all the way down to the valley. And I don't know where are you from, but when the three kings come to any town on this Catalonia, how we welcome them in 6th of January, which is really close to San Antonio. We carry torches. The three kings, they bring the renovation of our landscape. So in our cultural, previous to our Christianism, all this knowledge is well there. So I encourage you to bring back respect to our ancestors and bring back our cultural, because it has the heritage and the knowledge to solve the problems we are facing now. That's what I understand. We have to. But, yeah, and just to finish, if I, as incident commander in the fire service, has to let the fire burn tomorrow, or has to put it out, I mean, I can let a fire burn this June that is still with the vegetation really moist and burn 1,000 hectares. That means I can control whenever I want. That's what I should be doing, because it's a thing I can manage. Or I put it out and wait for a dry year to have a fire, and then I will not put it out. I will not be able to decide anything. I will lose everything. Fire will do whatever he wants. So the question is either we burn or manage when we can, or the system will do it by himself. And that's the decision.
Yeah, congratulations for both the speakers for the great talks. I've learned, I am a water person, and I guess one of my groundwater person. My first question to Urbano would be, of the 4 factors you mentioned, we can act on water. And actually, this is the reason I am here. Although, Mark, if you tell me that the latent heat transfer makes a moist vegetation worse than a dry vegetation, that goes against my intuition. But I believe you. So my proposal to say, no, we can have more water, I will drop it. But still, and this is a question to you, Urbano, I mean, the general understanding of people who are not specialists in fires like me is that all these fires in California were caused by La Niña because of the mountains are drying up, vegetation is dry, so I guess the activation energy to start the fire is lowered dramatically when the soil and the vegetation is dry. So how do we manage this contradiction between the latent heat transport, which is very intense when the soil and the plants are moist, and this perception of people like me that, the things are worrying when the system is dry?
Regarding California, perhaps Mark has much more to say than me because he has direct experience there. But I'd like to add that I have one of the colleagues who also participated in writing this report is Fernando Pulido from the University of Extremadura, who put forward this initiative of the Mosaico project. And he says that we do not fight wildfires with water. We fight wildfires with milk, with wine, and with oil. That's the principles behind the mosaic landscape. And if I may add something regarding Australia, their major concern are the wildland-urban interface areas. They are not so much concerned, as Mark has highlighted, about natural, if we can say that, natural wildfires, but for the wildfires that reach urban areas. And since the settlement pattern in Australia is very low density, and so they are trying to identify what solutions they can adopt, and this is the same in the United States with the same urban pattern, in order to make these suburban areas more resistant to wildfires. And despite beyond the defense space of each individual hazard, of each individual household or building, actions at the community level have to be done as well. So this is not resolved yet. There has to be a combination, because California has adopted already enforced regulation for the adoption of fireproof building, and this has not worked properly. It has to be improved in order to avoid the last fires we have seen in January. Thank you.
But the Australian and the Californian problem is mainly a problem of Anglo-Saxon culture living in a Mediterranean country. Why the urban interface problem has not been a problem in the Mediterranean until recently? Because as a firefighters, when the fire gets to a urban interface built in the 70s, it stops. Doesn't go through. Now it's starting to go through because there is new materials and because of some extreme fire. But it means if you build properly, you can avoid a lot of the problems on the urban interface. But when you build the urban interface under the promise that the public service will stop any fire, it's like building in a city and allowing build houses without the proper materials to avoid fire. So the difference in the fires in the Barcelona in the 60s and now is because we did a prevention in the material in the code of construction. That would make the difference. And the same in the urban interface. But if the problem is the bigger the fire, the bigger the plane, and the bigger the fire service they will send you to respond, and we base the policy in the policy of heroes and in the policy of we can do anything because it's climate change over us and there's nothing to do, then there is no way we can solve the problem. There's enough knowledge to solve the problem, but things has to be put in place. And again, like in Australia and in Anglo-Saxon Aboriginal people, Aboriginals that have suffered Anglo-Saxons. So Anglo-Saxons publish a lot more than we publish in the academia. And that goes for you guys. You are the academia guys here. Now, North Atlantic Oscillation is what drives the climate and the fire climate in Europe. Why we know about El Niño and La Niña? Because it's affecting the United States. And they're publishing a lot. Why we don't know about La Nau? Because it's affecting the fire in Europe. And Germany, Netherlands, Brussels, France, Northern France, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, they use it, they didn't used to burn. So the fire was not a problem for them. Now it is starting to be a problem. Now we're starting to see it. Yeah, in 2018, and you can make no, but 2018, what happened in 2018 in Europe? We lost 140 people in Greece, where all the resources were, in Sweden. We lost 200,000 hectares in Greece. We lost 21,000 hectares in Sweden. The resources were up there. Now they're starting to burn. Now they're starting to build a problem. Now we're starting to make policies in Europe. But there is no proportional, the issue. about Lanao, which is what been creating the fires in Northern Europe the last 3 months, and the precipitation down here. It's the pattern, the oscillation pattern that drives the climate of fire in Europe and the regimes of fire in Europe. And how climate change is affecting those North Atlantic oscillations. It's as important as La Nina thing. And you can correlate the houses burned in Europe to Lanao and not to El Nino. And that's the issue here. But too many policies in Europe are based under El Nino effects and not under Lanao effects. And that's what I am claiming.
But there are no questions online, in fact, and it's 7:30. So I think that all I have to say is like thank you everyone for being here and the speakers as well and the audience. And well, I hope that this subject has raised interest, and let's hope the best for the future. Okay, have a good evening.